Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm from Dynamic Boards, and today I'm speaking to Ioannis. He's a professor at London Business School and a leading expert in sustainability leadership and corporate responsibility. Alongside this, he's on several advisory boards, including being a member of the World Economic Forum Expert Network, where he offers expert guidance on sustainable development. So, Ioannis, to start off with, what gets you out of bed in the morning? Why do you so believe in the cause of sustainability in business? What does it mean to you?
So, Sarah, thanks a lot for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Actually, sustainability for me is the reason I'm in this profession. I don't want to talk about myself too much, but basically, once I finished my PhD, I had this period where I was kind of considering, why am I in this profession? Why do I study businesses? Why do I study organizations? And for me, the idea of combining the knowledge of that we have developed in business schools, right? What we know about organizations with the idea that organizations can have a positive impact in the world, or that in the past they have caused a lot of harm in the world, was a very powerful one. So it gave me almost a personal purpose or a meaning in to stay in this profession in order to start study this particular topic. So what gets me up in the morning is quite literally this: understanding why is it, how is it that companies integrate environmental and social issues into the way they do business, with a broader perspective being that, look, we live in a world that is packed with problems, especially in the environmental and social domains, right? Problems that need what? Innovative solutions that can be scaled up quickly. Well, I don't know of any other institution apart from the business organization that can do both, right? That can has that capability, and that for me provides meaning, right? That's why, and purpose even. That's why I want to understand how that happens, when it happens well, and how we can, learn from it, and hopefully share those best practices across the business world.
Amazing. And I know you run that training initiatives as well to help people and organizations sort of learn how to do that better. And so you're having an impact in that way. So I guess question, some people say, can you do well and do good? I know you're going to say 100% yes to that. Have you had a challenge on whether this is kind of a woke notion, the idea of sustainability at the moment? And how do you sort of ground it?
I think the issues are much more complex than that. So you cannot just ask the question, can you do well and do good? And for the following reason, I think that there's two aspects to the sustainability story. Half of the sustainability story, which I'm going to use sustainability and ESG interchangeably, by the way. Half of the sustainability story is what I call a global cost correction. It is time to pay the bill. We have destroyed a lot of natural resources. Think about deforestation, acidification of the oceans, think about carbon emissions, climate change, right? We have created a number of other negative externalities like inequality, human rights violations, and so on and so forth. So we need to understand that part of the sustainability story, of course, is going to entail a higher cost. But it's a higher cost because we have been, essentially exploiting, using, overusing, or abusing a number of these resources because it so happened that the market system did not put a price on them. So companies, so think about, that's why we have all these conversations about the carbon tax, for instance. In the European Union is already discussing a carbon adjustment tax at the border. So all of these are attempts, what we call in traditional economics, right, to price in these externalities. This is going to happen. Otherwise, the whole planet becomes unsustainable. So half of that story is to understand that costs are going to go up. So are you going to do well by doing good? Well, if you are a company that understands that this is going to happen and you start making those investments today to be best prepared for a world in which these negative externalities are accounted for, the better position you're going to be. Of course, the other half of the story, as we mentioned in your opening question, is about, well, will you be the company that comes up with those innovative solutions to address these challenges? In other words, find that sweet spot. Think about electric cars, for instance, right? Yes, you can be a very successful company and at the same time take with your cars, you can replace the fleet of combustion engines and fossil fuel cars with electric vehicles, and you contribute to the world as well, right? So in that second part, when companies become strategic, when integration of these environmental and social challenges is genuine, is real, and it's at the core of the business model, and is strategic in that respect, not just all sustainability initiatives all the time, right? You need to marry essentially the resources and capabilities and innovation capability that the company has with the environmental and social issue that it tries to address. So as I mentioned, we've seen this in electric vehicles, we've seen this in clean tech, we see this in plant-based diet, we see this in the packaging industry with new materials being developed to replace plastic and so on and so forth. So in that respect, of course, yeah, you can do well, and do good at the same time, as long as you understand those challenges and that tension within sustainability.
And then is there a horizon that you're looking at when you ask that question? So do well and do good this year, or do well and do good and exist as a company in 10, 20 years to come?
It depends on the industry that you're in. Clearly, it's going to depend on the industry clock speed, right? Some industries move faster than others, and some move slower. Think about automobiles, for instance. The industry was stable for decades before we asked the question, well, the combustion engine and fossil fuel cars are no longer, they cannot be part of a sustainable future. And that propelled the industry to move very quickly. Other industries, think about cement, long haul shipping, even airlines, are much slower. The truth of the matter is, though, that although in previous transitions, if you think about, for instance, the Industrial Revolution, if you think the digitization and so on, in many ways, we didn't have a binding deadline. In the case of social environmental issues, we do. Look at the latest synthesis report from the IPCC that tells us, we're really, headed to climate disaster. Look at the planetary boundaries framework that tells us that we are already exceeding and putting at risk the entire planetary system by violating some of these parameters, including the loss of biodiversity and so on and so forth. So I think our timing, if you like, in this case, is not the processes or the business or the sociological processes that take place. It should be science. Right. And from there, we backward engineer. Okay, given that we are certainly moving towards a cliff, right, when it comes to climate disaster, how can we, backward engineer and think backwards about what we should be doing today? Cancel the climate scenario, right? That's where you say, well, net zero by 2050, 50% reduction compared to 2030, and so on. So as long as there's a science foundation and working backwards, my view, that's what should be defining our clock speed.
I guess on clocks, interesting point with non-execs is kind of they're on boards for 6 and maximum 9 years. So yeah. How do you feel like that impacts in terms of encouraging individuals to think long-term about the organization that they're stewarding as a director for a short period of time, really?
There is no, in my view, let me just take a step back and say, look, we live in a world in which if we are serious about dealing with these environmental and social challenges, we need to think about change at the level of the individual, at the level of organizations, at the level of governments, and at the level of global institutions. It's not an either or. These things are not mutually exclusive. And quite frankly, if you see the scientific data, right, we are at a point where we should be saying it's all of the above and hope for the best. Okay, that's where we are right now. So non-executive directors, I think they have a very important role in terms of enabling, empowering, guiding, and monitoring the organization in terms of integrating these ESG issues. They can, of course, provide an independent oversight for those that do have the experience to also provide more strategic guidance to companies in terms of how to do this integration. And of course, often enough, in order to avoid tunnel vision or groupthink on these issues or get carried away by the latest fad that you read out there about sustainability, what you need to be doing as a non-executive director is actually to challenge management decisions, right? If I were to become more specific in terms of particular things that, in my experience and in my view, NEDs should be doing is, first of all, making sure that you work closely with the executive team to make sure that these sustainability considerations are truly integrated into the strategy. No greenwashing, no box ticking, but real integration. Genuine risk management, think about climate change impacts, for instance, think about biodiversity impacts, regulatory impacts, and all that. So making sure that the executive team is making a true integration of these issues. Second of all, as an NED, you should be able to sort of argue, advocate for board diversity. We know that diversity of thought, wherever it comes from, diversities of background, of gender, of ethnicity, and of expertise, makes for better boards. So I think that's part of what an NED can do. Clearly, standard roles of oversight and accountability apply, but I would actually encourage NEDs to be particularly careful about these domains, because honestly, I think that a lot of executive teams out there think they know more than they actually do on environmental and social issues, right? We do live in a world, unfortunately, where we're thinking about sustainability issues as a reporting or disclosure issue, as if companies have solved these problems and the only thing that we're missing is the accountants to come in and measure what we did. That's wrong. As a non-executive director, you need to understand that there will be a period of experimentation. Companies have not dealt with issues like biodiversity before in the way that we are expecting them to do now. And, newsflash, there's no biodiversity experts that are sending it en masse their CVs to work for corporates, right? So there are even structural gaps. So we have to be acutely aware. It's not just about sitting at your desk and say, oh, give me the latest ESG data that someone somehow gathered, and I'm going to make this company sustainable. It's about real practices, real experimentation. And that can happen once any of these sort of advocate, push, empower perhaps companies to move to more a broader stakeholder understanding of the organization. The idea that companies in the long run create value by paying attention to all of their stakeholders, not just their shareholders. And when I say pay attention, through a structured dialogue, a two-way communication and continuous communication that helps reveal sort of the risks, the opportunities, the challenges, the friction points, and essentially a stakeholder management system acts as a sense-making sort of tool for the organization, right? Because if you have better stakeholder relationships, that means you have essentially better intangible assets. Now, what's the benefit of that? More timely, more accurate, and more trustworthy information it's arriving to the organization from all the stakeholders. And guess what? If you have more trustworthy, accurate, timely information coming in, your decision making is going to be better, right? So that's just in a nutshell, if you like. But those are very, very important responsibilities for NEDs that they some of them are extensions of what they did before, but they do complexify exactly because sustainability requires them to do so in domains that traditionally have not been the responsibility of business, or they've been neglected.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a challenge around non-executive director experience and knowledge in this area. And you've highlighted it. There's not this amazing resource pool that we can pull on and that's going to come and join the boards anytime soon. It's going to take a while for the market to catch up with that. So have you got any tips or suggestions of what non-execs should be reading, should be exploring to make sure that they are increasing their knowledge in this area?
Well, absolutely. So, that one of the reasons why I launched my own course, and this is not meant to be a plug, but actually it was real market research, because, we all read out there, boards don't have the necessary awareness, they don't have this necessary knowledge and so on. So I do think that NEDs needs to have a basic strategic understanding of what sustainability means in a business context. I think that, first of all, on their own time, and I do this personally continuously, right, is there's a lot of fantastic scientists that have written, whether it's books or articles and so on, explaining the science for a general audience. I personally think, I almost consider it my personal responsibility to know the science as best as I can, as best as I understand it, because I feel that that makes me more convincing, right? When I'm going into an organization to talk about climate practices, it's not enough to have a vague idea about what's happening in climate change. It's not enough to have a vague idea about why 2 degrees is just the Paris Agreement. Yeah, but why is it the Paris Agreement? How many parts per million of carbon do we have in the atmosphere? When was the last time, which was millions of years ago, that we had the same amount of particles in the atmosphere? And this is just carbon, right? It's important to be able to articulate why is it that biodiversity loss is such an important issue. In other words, that basic awareness of the science, I think, is critical, and they ought to know about that, my humble opinion, because that's the foundation. You can become a lot more convincing in your role if you are able to draw those links between essentially extrapolating the scientific scenarios going forward and thinking backward, well, okay, what does that mean for this particular business? What are the touch points of those trends with our business model today? And in a world that is shifting so dramatically, will this particular business be around 10 or 20 years down the line, right? Or reverse, right? What do we have to do today? What sort of investments, what sort of business model adjustments, what sort of people do we need to recruit such that in 5, 10 years down the line, we continue to be a sustainable business? In addition to that basic understanding of the scientific facts, I think you need a language of sustainability that is more foundational. And that's what I do in my 6-week online course, right? And by the way, as I tell people in this course, if you want to read the story of Unilever or any other company, you can just go to the media and read it. I'm not interested in storytelling. I'm much more interested in conveying to you what we currently know based on actual real research, not McKinsey reports or whatever other company has reports. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but they're not research, right? I'm talking about rigorous insights that come from real research, given what we know up to this day, and be able to have a more realistic, pragmatic understanding of sustainability. So the last thing I would say, I would also encourage NEDs to pay a lot of attention to the sources of the information that they read, because there's a lot of kumbaya out there. Sustainability, find a stakeholder, dance kumbaya, and the world is going to be a better place. It's a win-win. Well, you know what? If everything was a win-win, we would all be out of work. What decisions are you making if it's a win-win? The challenges on NED, all right, to advise, to oversight, and to monitor executives is precisely when there is no win-win, when there's investments, when there's costs. That's the reality of sustainability. The rest is just storytelling, right? At the very kind of more pragmatic level, in addition to the business side and the science side, you also need to have, especially now, a very good understanding of the regulatory developments, whether it's about, actual regulation of environmental issues like major regulations, or whether it's, especially in the EU, but also more broadly, about disclosure and reporting regulations, emerging sustainability reporting standards, notions of materiality within reporting standards, and so on and so forth.
So Ioannis, if someone's watching this and they're on the board of maybe a small private company, a housing association, and one of the public sector organizations, and they're thinking, goodness, that sounds quite intimidating. I don't think I'm going to have my head around all of those scientific research papers. Where do you think is a good place to start?
I need to start by saying that, I personally don't think that distinction between large or small public or private companies is that important, because if you believe my story that I told you earlier, that we need change across the board and then hope for the best, nobody's an extra here, no matter where you sit. In other words, regardless of the size of the company, the sector, whether it's a listing status, I do think that if you are an NED, you should be actively sort of engaging with executives. We should be actively engaging with the company in order to encourage, support, monitor, and propel even the organization's sort of sustainability efforts, right? So the things that we talked about earlier in terms of integrating ESG into strategy, promoting perhaps a more long-term perspective for the organization, encouraging more transparency and accountability, especially on non-ESG issues. Because, think about it, let's say private companies, for instance, you still need to recruit talent. And we know that younger generations care about the companies they work for, care about what they believe in, their values, their purpose, and their impact in the world. So it doesn't matter if you're public or private, if you are going to compete in that labor market, and that labor market cares about sustainability, you better get your act together, right? Now, if you want to really address those challenges, you still need the board expertise, awareness, and diversity in order to address them. As a private or smaller company, nothing prevents you from, engaging with your stakeholders in the same way, participating in broader partnerships. And the thing is, especially for smaller companies, clearly they don't exist in a vacuum. A lot of the time, small SMEs, for instance, are part of larger supply chains. And there's no question that the larger companies and the leading companies in the sustainability space, they're very proactive in terms of the expectations that they have from their entire supply chain. They understand that it's collective responsibility, and they increasingly set criteria, right? Do you have a biodiversity policy, a climate policy, a human rights policy? If you don't, or if you have a policy that is not sufficiently of high standard, I'm not going to work with you as the largest company, right? So I mean, there's obvious business implications in that respect. So as I said, I don't think there's anyone extra. I understand that, you know, smaller companies might be more resource constrained, for instance, instead of making these investments. I understand that these issues may be far off, but let's not forget that a lot of these larger challenges, they do have local impacts, right? So whether we talk about things like air pollution, climate change impacts, there are the loss of biodiversity, impact on communities, violations of human rights. These are very local issues, right? There's not this, it's not just this amorphous thing that is someone else's problem. These broader issues can and they do manifest at the local level. So even if you're an SME, in one way or another, you or your supply chain partners, or even the local industry that you're part of, is likely to in any case be affected. And think about this, like I always think this is not a great example, but think about COVID, right? COVID, of course, impacted all companies, right? I mean, it impacted larger ones with deeper supply chains, but it went all the way down to smaller companies. And frankly, COVID is nothing compared to climate change or biodiversity loss. Right, so we need to be acutely aware that, you know, we're not going to be shielded by our geography or our industry or our sector. One way or another, even in a very localized manner, these impacts are going to materialize. So you as an NED, you as a small organization have a choice. Am I going to be part of the solution, or am I going to be part of the problem?
Thank you, Ioannis. I mean, obviously, I hope everyone watching this thinks I want to be part of the solution. So any tips, just if someone's watching this and they think, yes, totally agree with you, Ioannis, want to take a first step, can you give them a couple of tips on where to go?
Well, as I was mentioning earlier, build your own capacity and capability to understand these issues, advocate and monitor on these issues. So as a non-executive director, I think you ought to develop first your own personal capability to be able to be that voice, right, that brings these issues to the table, brings these issues to attention. Also, I would say build your network, right? Because increasingly so, I think sustainability and ESG is becoming part of the conversation of all the NED networks, at least the ones that I am aware of. So it is important to learn from each other. Don't forget that sustainability and these challenges manifest in different ways across industries. And for especially for those NEDs that cut across industries, right, that may be multiple boards across sectors, it is very important to cross-fertilize the knowledge, the insights, and potentially building those collaborations. Yeah. Or in fact, joining those partnerships to keep up to date with what's going on. And the last and the most important thing, I think, like any other activity of the NEDs, they need the courage to speak up. And I think these particular issues, you need the courage to speak up. And this is the thing, you know, we talked a lot about, you know, bringing your whole self to work and emotional commitment. I think this is a particular domain where that's important. And I'll give you an example, right? So when an CEO says that, you know, oh, I want to make this company digital. Well, most people would say, well, yeah, that makes sense, right? I mean, they're not going to have feelings towards it, right? It makes sense strategically and business. But if a CEO comes out and says, oh no, I'm going to make this company sustainable, or I'm going to make this company responsible, or I'm going to make this company have a positive impact in the world, yes, people are going to have feelings and views and norms and even moral values against something like that, which basically means that the executive team is going to have to implement a cultural transformation process, a change of mindset, and will require emotional commitment. Well, who is going to support them, right? Who is going to legitimize those efforts? Who is going to encourage those efforts and provide an external view and oversight, but also experience? It is the board. It is part of and the NEDs more specifically, right? So as an NED, you should be able to, you know, equip yourself to be able to provide that support and that legitimacy to executive teams that undertake these very transformational processes. And it's an internal external thing, right? And externally, you can be as an advocate supporter of the organization's efforts to external stakeholders.
Ioannis, is an interesting point. I guess when people are looking at digital transformation, it's really costly to do digital transformation, but it's a no-brainer. Like, you definitely want to do it. Whereas I guess when people are thinking about biodiversity, climate, they haven't got their head around the fact that this is a no-brainer. You're definitely going to do it. It's just where is the cost or the investment, and how can you plan for that and make sure you do it well?
Precisely. So that's the change in the mindset, right? To go from a more sort of, oh, this is a chore, this is something that is imposed by the outside, versus understanding that this may well be an investment, right? And all investments entail some kind of cost. But the question is, well, will it pay off? Is it core to your business model? Consider, for instance, R&D in the pharmaceutical industry. You're not going to say, oh, R&D is a cost. Yes, of course it's a cost, but it's core investment to your business model. Because if you are a pharmaceutical company that doesn't have a strong R&D pipeline, then you're not a pharmaceutical company, or you're not going to be for much longer. So that's what we mean by, especially when we talk about the upside of sustainability, what are those investments that, well, of course, they're going to entail some costs today, but that are fundamental investments for the success and the thriving of your business model down the line, which also allows the company to become a better fit for this very rapidly shifting competitive landscape because of the environmental and social challenges.
Thank you, Ioannis. That's great. So I know there's networks now for non-execs that are particularly passionate about this issue, and I know Chapter Zero have been campaigning a lot to get non-execs to join.
Correct. Yes.
To upskill themselves and to challenge where boards are not taking enough action. And for anyone watching, I know Chapter Zero are a fantastic network for engaging with the climate challenge, specifically focused on non-execs and how to upskill them and connect them with others so that they can do that cross-learning that you mentioned there, Ioannis. Ioannis, thank you so much for your time. I hope everyone watching this, you felt empowered to take action and to challenge. And also,
thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Your knowledge area as well. So we'll share a link to your course too, Ioannis, just below this video. So thank you so much and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been a pleasure, and thank you everyone for listening in. Thank you.